What's good? It's Woog. We have a heavyweight juggernaut who's coming off of a knockout win over Joseph Parker. Who knocks out Joseph Parker? Versus another giant who might as well be undefeated if you consider how he lost via decision against Filip Ergovic out in Saudi Arabia. We have Joyce, 15 wins and 0 losses, taking on Zhilei, 24 wins, 1 loss, and 1 draw. There are heavyweights, and then there are these super heavyweights. Do you guys remember back in the day? And when I say back in the day, in this case, I'm talking about the late 90s into the early and mid 2000s. There was a boxer named Lance Whitaker, nicknamed Goofy Whitaker. He was about 6'8", and the reason why he was a story was because he was such a physical outlier in boxing at 6'8". He wasn't a particularly good boxer. He was okay. He wasn't a super coordinated boxer. He was a little goofy, if you will, and he was kind of a win some, lose some, but kind of a must-see attraction. Boy, how things have changed in just a few years, because, you know, I remember when Vladimir Klitschko and Vitaly Klitschko hit the scene, they were must see. Now, they were much more coordinated than Lance Whitaker, but these guys were looking like giants at the time. I remember seeing Vladimir Klitschko fighting merciless Ray Mercer, former heavyweight contender in the 80s and so forth. In fact, I think he actually won a WBO heavyweight belt in 91. In the early 90s, he had actually won a share of the heavyweight title, but Ray Mercer, way past his prime, was in there with a prime young Vladimir Klitschko. And Ray Mercer, who's about 6'1", which, you know, wasn't a giant even then, but it wasn't a small heavyweight in the way that it would be a small heavyweight today. But Ray Mercer was in there against the 6'6"-ish Vladimir Klitschko, and I'm watching this with my dad, and we're looking at this fight like, what the hell is Ray Mercer supposed to do with this guy? Well, nowadays, you've got a class of super heavyweights, and when I say super heavyweight, I mean anything taller than, let's say, 6'4", so 6'5" and up, or anything bigger than 235 pounds, even though I know Bridger weight is up to, I think, like 225. But basically, you have a bunch of fighters who are 6'6" plus or 250 plus, many of them both 6'6" plus and 250 plus. Deontay Wilder, you know, very, very tall, but a slimmer heavyweight. But you've got this whole class of people who would be considered giants by 90s and even early 2000s standards. Like what, Filip Ergovic, I believe, is at least 6'7". Obviously, you have the Gypsy King Tyson Fury, who's a 6'9" technical boxer who is coordinated, and you have Anthony Joshua, who's about 6'6", 240s to 250s and so forth. And then in this case, we have Joyce and Zhilei, who are both 6'6" and who are both 250 or above. So the super heavyweight has become less and less of an anomaly and more common. So let's talk about these fighters, Joyce and Zhilei. Joyce is such a fascinating study when you look at his fight style. I remember watching him fight Joe Hanks a few years ago when Joyce was signed to Al Heyman PBC. And Joyce, you'll see him in the early rounds in certain fights, and he's getting tagged up a bit. And he looks like right when he's trying to get off with his power shot, he's kind of getting hit. And he looks a little bit oafy, a little dopey in the early rounds where it's kind of like, ugh. And then he just kind of, you know, meanders along and keeps on coming, and he gets hit another couple of times. It's almost like a Mike Tyson's punch-out opponent if that opponent never went down. Like, this guy's resilience is really remarkable. And as I said in the beginning of this thing, who knocks out Joseph Parker? I am seeing this guy, Joyce, get, again, tagged up in the early rounds. I mean, even in his fight against Carlos Takam, you look at how Takam was hitting him with that overhand right that Takam loves to shoot. It's a very nice right hand. We saw that come in handy against Tony Yoka in Takam's last fight. Tony Yoka, by the way, is the guy who controversially beat Joyce to earn the gold medal in the Olympic Games, making Joyce a silver medalist in those Olympics. But you know, Carlos Takam was tagging Joyce with that overhand right, and I'm thinking like, damn, is this going to be the fight where Joyce gets sunk essentially? Because Carlos Takam was hitting him very cleanly, But Joe Joyce, like he does against all of his opponents, starts to just walk them down, and you start to realize, like, damn, my firepower isn't working. It looks like it's landing, but for some reason, this guy just keeps on taking the shots and then just marching along, throwing his jab. And he does have a nice jab. It's not the fastest jab, but it's a pummeling jab. And then you start seeing him just put the power punches behind it, and he starts closing the distance. Not that, you know, he has trouble at 6'6" at being in range. He's always more or less either in or near range. So he's coming in, and he's not even changing levels a bit. He's kind of switching up the guard, sometimes a high guard, sometimes a little bit lower, but he's taking these shots and he's coming in and he's working you over, and then he's beating you the hell up and knocking you out. Like, out of his 15 wins, 14 have come via knockout. And again, he's finished guys who don't get finished, like Joseph Parker. Even Christian Hammer has gone the distance against Alexander Povetkin, Luis Ortiz, Frank Sanchez. Well, Christian Hammer did not go the distance against Joe Joyce. In fact, he got TKO'd in the 4th round, and it was a combination of headshots and body shots that just caused Christian Hammer, again, very durable fighter, to absolutely crumble. So Joe Joyce is quite the specimen, and he's quite the case study. I mean, I've seen rumors that this guy's bone density is different than other guys by a pretty high percentage, which, if that were true, which I can't confirm that is true, but if it were true, it would explain a lot in terms of how he's able to eat not only jabs, but power punches, and just kind of shrug it off and just keep on coming and exercising and executing his game plan. And by the way, props to Bryant Jennings for being the only guy to go the full, what was it, a 12-round distance? Yeah, 12 rounds against Joe Joyce. Bryant Jennings, you might remember, also challenged Vladimir Klitschko for the title and lost via decision. I think Luis Ortiz might be the only guy to have stopped Bryant Jennings. Maybe he was stopped again in more recent years, but when he was still prime or near prime, Luis Ortiz actually got him out of there. But yeah, if you look at Joe Joyce's last few wins, he beat Daniel Dubois like 4 fights ago. Then he beat Carlos Takam, and then he beat Christian Hammer, and then probably his best win to date, that knockout win over Joseph Parker, where Joseph Parker came in shape. He was ready to move. He was ready to, you know, mix up his punches. Joseph Parker did not fight a bad fight. And again, Joseph Parker went the distance with Dillian White, went the distance against Anthony Joshua, and has beaten some pretty damn good fighters. But by like the middle rounds, the writing was on the wall by the time you started seeing Parker look absolutely busted up, look pretty exhausted, and then looking like, hey man, you can run, but you can't hide. Like, he was looking like he was buying time, trying to shoot his right hand, trying to hold and then move and then stick a jab out and then, you know, change levels, put your head down and throw the punch up high. And again, he's landing with a lot of these shots against Joe Joyce, who really doesn't seem to mind much. It's the weirdest thing. And that's why he is appropriately nicknamed the Juggernaut. It's really bizarre. And another thing about Joe Joyce's style of pressure is that when you start catching him, even if you start changing angles and moving laterally, the guy never really stops pursuing you. He was a little bit more reluctant against the power puncher Daniel Dubois, ended up stopping him with jabs to the eye, ended up damaging Daniel Dubois' eye in the 10th round. But Joe Joyce's style is such that even when his feet aren't aligned to properly place his punches, he will like throw at weird angles. So if you hit him and then move off to the side, he will throw a punch out that way. Like, he won't even be facing you, but he'll throw a punch this way, or he'll throw like a scooping shot where he starts out at a wrong angle, but then he turns his torso into you, and then he's throwing while he's turning into you, and then he's still stepping forward, so then he can let another punch go behind that one, and then usually another punch up top, because again, he's kind of mixing it up top and down low. So think about that. Even if you are a good mover and say you jab, move your head and then move off to an angle, he will rotate his body and throw a clubbing shot, maybe to your torso, maybe up top, but he's doing that as he's stepping towards you. So even after you win an exchange, there's not like another 5 to 10 seconds before the next exchange commences. It's more like 1 to 2 seconds before you have to fight again. So there's no real reprieve in being able to just totally catch your breath and say, okay, let's try to regroup and then we engage again. No. He's not giving you room to do that. So when I see this matchup between Joyce and Zhilei, who is a very good fighter, Zhilei, he is 39 years old. That's another element to this fight, by the way. Joyce, 37 years old, Zhilei, 39 years old. And Zhilei, again, he's going to be even in height with Joyce, as was Daniel Dubois. So maybe you get a slightly more tepid Joyce, but I wouldn't really count on it. This is what I think is going to happen here. Zhilei, I think, is a little bit more, believe it or not, of a sweet scientist than Joyce. He's a sharper puncher, I believe, especially with that left hand. So this is orthodox Joyce against southpaw Zhilei. Zhilei has a very hard left hand, even though it was a scooping right hand that kind of cuffed Filip Hrgović, one of the boogeymans in the division, or at least he was before this fight against Zhilei, where Hrgović earned a controversial, disputed, very close decision on that Usyk versus Joshua 2 undercard, but Zhilei actually knocked Hrgović down with a scooping right hand, kind of coming across the top, upside Hrgovic's head. But Zhilei, who started his career pretty late, that's why he's 39 years old with only 25 professional fights, but he, again, I believe is the sharper puncher between these two. He is the one who I think is going to get off to the better start here. Like, I could see Joyce getting tagged, and maybe this is the fight where Joyce's style finally catches up to him, and maybe he gets tagged and blasted, dropped in the early rounds. That is on the table here. I think, again, Zhilei is a very hard puncher, especially if you're not elusive, and Joyce is not elusive. He's a lot of things. He's not very elusive. I used to think he was like pretty decent defensively, but in recent fights, it's almost more like, the hell with defense. Let me just wear you out. Again, he was better defensively, I believe, against Daniel Dubois, and he was even better defensively against Joe Hanks several fights ago. It really wasn't until I saw him fight Carlos Takam that I saw, hey, Joyce is really just getting tagged repeatedly, not with jabs, but with power punches. And again, the Takam fight was like 3 fights ago. So Takam and then Christian Hammer, Joseph Parker, all landed several times very cleanly against Joyce. So I think he's going to get tagged here against Zhilei early. Now we'll see if he can handle the power. If he is who we think he is, which there's a lot of recency bias, right? We see the way that he looked absolutely scary against Joseph Parker. If that version of Joyce enters this fight against Zhilei, I have almost no doubt that Joyce is going to win. In fact, I don't know who beats that Joyce, if that Joyce is able to sustain that type of durability and resilience. And, again, he's 37 years old. Can he keep on marching, and can he keep on exercising like an unbelievable cardio to be able to continue to pursue his heavyweight opponent minute after minute, exchange after exchange, and then round after round throughout what appears to be the entirety of the fight, at least for as long as the fight lasts. Again, this knockout over Joseph Parker took place in the 10th. His stoppage win over Daniel Dubois took place in the 10th. So it's not like he's only able to fight in this juggernaut-ish style for like the first 6 rounds or even 8 rounds. He's able to do it into the championship rounds. So again, if this version of Joyce enters against Zhilei, I think he wins, especially if you consider Zhilei's what appears to be his Achilles heel, and it manifested against Jerry Forrest. That was the majority draw, and this was a fight where he dropped Forrest 3 times in 3 rounds. So that tells you how much he faded in that fight for Jerry Forrest, who never knocked Zhilei down, to be able to, in a 10-rounder, make up for that big 3 knockdown deficit. And again, this wasn't 3 knockdowns in 1 round. This was 3 knockdowns spread across 3 rounds. So you've got a lot of catching up to do at that point. So Jerry Forrest basically won damn near everything after that point. But Zhilei, cardio wise, and I think he had like some sort of, it wasn't liver, I think it might have been like a kidney failure to where he was hospitalized after that fight. So it sounds like he had a legitimate medical issue that would explain why he faded so badly against Jerry Forrest in that fight. But even if you look at Zhang Zhilei's fight against Ergovich, where Ergovich had terrible body language throughout that fight, like there were points where he was getting tagged by Zhang Zhilei and then he would just kind of walk away from him, you know, while the fight was commencing. Like the ref didn't break him up or anything, and Filip Ergovich just looked kind of despondent or dejected. I wasn't sure what to make of that very poor body language, but Filip Ergovich got dropped in that fight. He got wobbled another 1 or 2 times in that fight where he looked like he was kind of on unsteady legs. But this ended up being a pretty competitive fight, especially on the back half of the fight. And much of this is because Zhang Zhilei started to fatigue really badly to where Ergovich was able to win many of those late rounds. So this isn't a one-off in terms of Zhang Zhilei looking less than stellar in, like, we'll say rounds 8 through 12. Now, he still had his moments and he still was able to hit Filip Ergovich with big shots in the late rounds. But again, minute after minute, frame by frame, he didn't have like a sustained attack and he looked like he was very fatigued and he was just wilting. Zhang Zhilei was, to where, you know, by the end of it, he was just kind of hanging over the ropes, as was Filip Ergovich. Both of these guys look exhausted by the end of this one. But if you can't fight a hard 12 rounds, it's hard to imagine that fighter surviving over the course of 12 rounds against somebody like Joe Joyce. Again, assuming that this is still the same Joe Joyce and he hasn't taken some precipitous dip in his abilities. Look, I think that if Zhang Zhilei is going to win this fight, he's going to have to tag Joe Joyce early and often, and he's going to have to like drop him or just demonstratively, noticeably, and functionally slow him down, like hurt him in the early rounds. Because if Joe Joyce is able to kind of eat a couple of left hands and fight a Joe Joyce style fight, then it's only a matter of time before he ends up stopping the very big Zhang Zhilei, probably in the middle and late rounds. And by the way, Zhang Zhilei appears to have a very good chin, so who knows what kind of punishment he could take. Maybe these guys can brawl to like a decision in going the distance, and then maybe Joe Joyce pulls off a decision win. But because of Zhang Zhilei's 39 years of age and his noticeable, you know, endurance issues, at least as far as I see it, I think that it's more likely that Joe Joyce actually gets a stoppage over Zhang Zhilei. So yeah, I think that Zhang Zhilei is going to have a very good start. He might have some very interesting moments. Joe Joyce has been getting tagged, especially early, by like each of his last few opponents. I don't think that's going to change here, especially with somebody who's able to, you know, exercise the craft that Zhang Zhilei is able to. Like, he's a crafty southpaw. Like, he's a good boxer. Again, I think he might be a better boxer. Like, if this was like a 3-rounder or something against Joe Joyce, I would say Zhang Zhilei has a very good chance at winning. But this isn't a 3-rounder. It isn't a 4 or 6-rounder. This is a 12-rounder, and I just think that it's more likely that Joe Joyce does survive whatever onslaught or shots he gets hit with, however big they are, from Zhang Zhilei. And if he's able to survive that, I'm going to take him via, we'll say, like 9th through 11th round TKO over Zhang Zhilei. So I'm going with Joe Joyce via late stoppage over the 39-year-old. And again, I think Zhang Zhilei does have a puncher's chance, but you're fighting the juggernaut, and he just hasn't shown any evidence that these punches matter. And it's really, really strange. But I'm going with Joe Joyce via late stoppage. Let me know your thoughts on this one in the comments. Who in the heavyweight division would you actually favor to beat Joe Joyce? Of course, anybody could beat anybody, right? Like but it's a game of probability. So who would you actually say has a better than 50% chance at beating Joe Joyce? Would it be Deontay Wilder because of his out of this world punching power? Would it be Tyson Fury because of his well-rounded craft, his 6'9" size, and his, you know, pretty good defense for somebody being that size, his head movement and his ability to jab and make it a rangy distance fight? Is it Tyson Fury? Is it Anthony Joshua? At this point, I don't think most would favor Joshua over Joe Joyce. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on that one in the comments, and also let me know who you are picking between Joe Joyce and Zhang Zhilei. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. By the way, Joe Joyce really needs a title shot if he beats Zhang Zhilei here. I think he's more deserving than Daniel Dubois. I think he's more deserving than whoever's next in line. I know Daniel Dubois, I believe, is Alexander Usyk's mandatory for one of the 3 belts that he's holding. In fact, it sounds like that might be Usyk's next fight. But Joyce really needs his shot if he gets by Zhilei here, especially because many people believe that Zhilei beat Filip Hrgović. That one I thought could have gone either way, but when I was watching it, it felt like Zhilei deserved the win. Like, I wasn't scoring this round over round. I was watching this more so as a fan, so I'm not gonna put too much weight into who deserved the decision win, but I felt, it seemed like Zhilei probably won one more round at least than Hrgović, and he had by far the bigger moments of the fight. Not only the knockdown, but in the multiple other times where he apparently hurt Hrgović. I felt bad for Zhilei for getting a decision loss in that one against Hrgović. But yeah, let me know what your thoughts are on Joyce versus Zhilei in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.